What's up, guys? We have introduced to you the Neolithic era or the Neolithic Revolution, talking about new rock, the Ice Age melting, and the earth getting revealed, land getting revealed that led to crop production, systematic farming, and then ultimately, from the last video that I did, a population boom because of the stability of the family. The family can feed itself, and so the family gets bigger, and you're going to see a population boom and the rise of cities where people are congregating and moving together, and all that is made possible obviously by agriculture and the systematic farming that we talked about the other day. So today, with the population boom and everybody congregating in one area because of the food supply being in one area, we are going to see the rise of specialized jobs. And so as more and more people are living in a certain area, by the way, we do call that population density. Population density is the amount of people living in a certain area. So if you have high population density, you must have a lot of people living in a certain area. If you have low population density, you would have not very many people living in a certain area. And so like Fort Worth definitely has high population density. Dallas has high population density. If you went out to a very small town in Texas, a very agricultural small town that doesn't have a lot of people living there, they would have small population density. But what you're going to start seeing is the specialization of your job, and you're going to see more different types of jobs. So instead of just agriculture and domestication of animals, working with animals, ranching, if you will, you're going to start seeing the need for tools being made. So you're going to see tool makers or blacksmiths, if you will. That's what we would call them today. People that are shaping, metal. Back in the Neolithic Revolution, it would have been bronze, or creating weapons or tools out of wood or rock. And so you're going to start seeing new jobs created that way that are more specialized. Jewelry. That could be another one in the Neolithic Revolution, the Neolithic era, the creation of jewelry makers. And so different ways to create things to make your city or your city-state or your civilization flourish. And so with that being said, you're going to start seeing the rise of what's called a barter economy. And I kind of mentioned that the other day in the video, but today we exchange money for goods. So we go to Walmart and we hand them coins or bills, and then they hand us the product that we wanted. That's a new concept when you look at the overall time period of world history. Back in the Neolithic era, they didn't have bills and coins. They had what they made. So if you were a jewelry maker, you made jewelry. If you were a crop producer, you had corn. If you were a blacksmith, as we would call it today, you made weapons maybe. And so you have something to offer someone else. Perfume, that was a big one. Spices were huge, specifically salt. So if you had those things in your hand and you wanted something else, you would exchange those. And so you would go to the market, or you'd go to the ziggurat, which we'll talk about later today or tomorrow, and you would exchange goods for goods. And that's called the barter system. It's bartering. You could literally go on Craigslist today, and there's a section called bartering where you could click that, and it would have somebody saying, I have a tractor that I'm willing to exchange for a boat. If you have a boat, we'll do a barter. I'll give you the tractor, you give me the boat, we'll call it even. That's bartering. It's exchanging goods for goods. And so with the rise of the population in the Neolithic era, and then the rise of specialized jobs and people making specialized things like jewelry, weapons, tools, and then agriculture, you could exchange those at the market. And that's how they did it. It's called a barter system. And that leads to the next thing, which is called, it leads to cultural diffusion. And what cultural diffusion is, well, we all know what culture is. Culture is how and how you do things, the way that you do things, the food that you eat. That's culture. Diffusion is moving from point A to point B. And so cultural diffusion is when your culture moves over into someone else's life or city that's not like you. And so that all is possible through this bartering system. So for instance, if I am an agricultural person and I have corn to trade, that's my money, is corn, and I travel, 20 miles, 30 miles, 40 miles across the land and find out that this other person, we'll call him John, this other person, John, has perfume or weapons or tools. And I'm like, ooh, I like that. Like, or, ooh, that's a pretty cool necklace you have on. Did you make that? And they're like, yeah, I make necklaces. And you're like, well, I'll tell you what, I've got 100 things of corn that I'll exchange and if you'll give me that necklace. And so you just did a barter. But more importantly, you talked to John, who's not from your city. And you're like, well, how did you start asking questions? How did you make that? Or he may be asking, dude, that's corn. Where do you grow that? And so that's cultural diffusion, getting people talking and exchanging ideas and thoughts that are in their head. And you start seeing the movement of ideas across the world. And that's how cultural diffusion happens. It all starts with trade, because you don't just trade your item for an item, you talk. And when you start talking, you start spreading ideas. And so that's pretty cool. Something else that does get spread as more and more people are spreading out and trading and bartering across the land, you definitely start seeing the spread of disease too. And that disease, you start seeing it way back in the Neolithic era, transmitting from animals to humans and then humans to humans. And that's obviously a big deal today with COVID and everything else. So with cultural diffusion and people that are exchanging their goods in the bartering system, unfortunately, you also start seeing the spread of disease, which that kind of explains how diseases spread across the world so quick. A lot of that does happen through trade. And so anyway, in review, and this is important, and I do definitely want you to answer these on the questions sheet that you'll have to fill out. What are the effects of a food surplus? When you have a surplus of food, it leads to a couple of things, and you should know these by now. You should be able to tell me right now what they are. I'll do them and I'll review them for you right now. The biggest, most important one is a population boom. I told you that. With more food, you can feed your babies, and so you see a population boom. You see with a food surplus, you start seeing specialization of jobs, which I told you, jewelry makers, tool makers, things like that. That's number 2. Number 3, you want to trade those goods, the bartering system. So number 3 is the spread of goods, bartering. Number 3 would be the rise of the barter system. Number 4 would be what I told you also, unfortunately, the spread of disease. That could be number 4. And then the one that I really like is cultural diffusion. That would be number 5. So the spreading of your culture, because you're exchanging goods and you're talking to one another and you're learning about each other. That kind of leads to the next big thing, which is what we're going to call the cradle of civilization. It's called Mesopotamia. It's kind of where it all started. Mesopotamia literally means the land between 2 rivers, and you do need to know the 2 rivers. It's the Tigris and the Euphrates. If you looked on a map today, you wouldn't see Mesopotamia. That region of Mesopotamia, the land between 2 rivers, it's a huge amount of land, is what would be present day like Syria and Iraq. And so on a map today, if you looked in that general area, that would be where we're talking right here. And you definitely would see the 2 rivers that are still today. It's a very fertile area. It's called a fertile crescent. It's fertile because the rivers bring flooding. And we all know that when a river floods, it fertilizes the land. It brings in nutrients to the soil, and it's very farmable. And so the land between 2 rivers becomes a very fertile area for agriculture, which is what we've been talking about for the last 2 days, which leads to a population boom. So the cities or the civilizations that pop up in this region called Mesopotamia, we are going to talk about for the next week. You have to know them. And I'm going to call them out in order, and you're going to write them down. It starts with the Sumerians. The Sumerians would be the first civilization in this area called Mesopotamia. It goes to the Akkadians. Akkad is the name of the city, A-K-K-A-D. The first city was Sumer, S-U-M-E-R. The second city is Akkad, A-K-K-A-D. The third city is Babylon, so the Babylonians, B-A-B-Y-L-O-N. The fourth city is the Assyrians, or Assyria, A-S-S-Y-R-I-A, followed by the Chaldeans, Chaldea, C-H-A-L-D-E-A. That's the 5th, I believe, city in Mesopotamia, or civilization that rises up in Mesopotamia. And then the last one would be the Persians. So the city-state, or the civilization of Persia. And so there are your civilizations that pop up in Mesopotamia, and that's in order. And so you have to ask, well, what happened to the one before? And it's a pretty easy answer. They got attacked. Not much defense system in Mesopotamia. There's no mountains, easily attackable. So when you go through the progression of the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Chaldeans, and then the Syrians to end it, one attacked the other, which attacked the other, which attacked the other, and they would take over, and it ended with the Persians. So that kind of takes you through the development of the civilizations in Mesopotamia. We're going to dive deeper into those, starting with Sumer on the next lesson. But I just want you to understand that the rise of these civilizations were in that area of the Fertile Crescent, the land between two rivers called Mesopotamia. And in those civilizations, you're going to see the rise of cities. So each civilization, like for instance the Sumerians, the city of Sumer, it's going to be a huge flourishing city. They're going to have a plumbing system. They're going to have streets. They're going to have irrigation. They're going to have a lot of things that we have today. And so it's kind of cool to see how that all starts. The first city-state, the first city that pops up is actually in Turkey. It's called Catalhoyuk. It's the first city. It had about 6,000 people that lived there. That's a question. It's spelled Catalhoyuk, Catalhoyuk. It's the first city. That's kind of a question that you may need to know. Another example of civilization, ancient civilization, I'm going to move away from Mesopotamia and go up to England, would be Stonehenge, which you guys have heard of, the rock structures that no one really knows how they got there, but we kind of do. But just kind of bringing up to you, we have evidence of old ancient civilizations. And in the Mesopotamian region, they start with the Sumerians and they work all the way through the Persians. And so lastly today, there's always 6 or 7 dead giveaways that a civilization exists. And so I want to end it today with you writing down the 6 or 7 things that are absolutely a must. They are the characteristics of a civilization. And the first one is you're going to see a government. They have a governmental system on the way to do things. Number 2 is they have a religion. Definitely have a religion. Number 3 is they have writing. You're going to see a form of writing, and of course, I already mentioned, or the video that you have watched or will watch will mention cuneiform. Back in the ancient times, a lot of symbols was their way to write. Art is absolutely evidence that a civilization is there. There's a social structure. Unfortunately, sometimes it's the low class, middle class, high class, or they call it different things, but you have a rank in society. And then lastly, there's a main city. Like there is an obvious main point, a city that's identifiable, like Fort Worth or Dallas. That it's where it all goes down, both fun stuff, social stuff, government stuff, things like that. So in review, a civilization is defined or characterized by these things. A government exists, religion exists, writing exists, art exists, social rank, social structure exists, and then you have a city, the actual name of the city. So I'm going to stop there. The next lesson will actually pick up with, I'll kind of dive into these Mesopotamian region civilizations, starting with Sumer and ending with the Persians. But see you next time.